a mysterious ancient writing.
Some legends are true.
Decoding it will take 50 years.
It's been called the Everest of Greek archaeology.
Lead to obsession.
She was so single-minded, she appeared almost completely devoid of a personal life.
And tragedy. But it will ultimately unlock the secrets of a lost civilization and rewrite history.
It reshapes our vision of the Greek world.
These are the codes that changed our world. Bizarre markings, random letters, and numbers. Words that make no sense. But cracking them unlocks military secrets, decodes ancient civilizations, and reveals enemies in our midst. Now we uncover how they were decoded, the genius minds that broke them, and the secrets they revealed. "100 miles off mainland Greece lies the Mediterranean island of Crete. The backdrop for some of the greatest stories in Greek mythology. From the secret hideout of Zeus, king of the gods, to the deadly Minotaur that struck fear into the island. In 1900, eccentric British archaeologist Arthur Evans landed on Crete to begin the hunt for proof of a long-lost civilization.
There's all this legendary stories about Crete. Arthur Evans thinks that he should be looking for a large palace, a kind of structure where legendary kings may have lived.
Evans believes a site on the north-central coast of the island could be the lost ancient city of Knossos, ruled over by the mythical King Minos.
So Arthur Evans had been able to discern for some time that there was a significant structure there, but I don't think he could have possibly imagined what he was going to find.
Within days of the dig starting, Evans hits the jackpot.
As Arthur Evans is digging, he sees material coming up, large building blocks, stone blocks.
He knew very quickly that he had made a spectacular archaeological find.
Evans has uncovered an incredible lost world, buried for 3,000 years.
The scale of this building was much larger than anything known at the time. It's basically twice as big as your average city block.
The experience of slowly unearthing this must have been absolutely incredible for Sir Arthur Evans. I think it was quite possibly beyond his wildest dreams.
Arthur Evans has discovered what could only be the mythical palace of King Minos.
He unearthed the ruins of a sprawling Bronze Age palace with hundreds of rooms, beautiful pottery, the crumbling remnants of beautiful frescoes.
It's a knowledge and understanding of engineering that would have seemed almost impossible for people at that time to believe or comprehend.
He knew that his suspicion that he should dig at Knossos had been confirmed.
But the palace is just the beginning. Evans goes on to uncover the remains of a vast and highly sophisticated city surrounding the palace. It dates back more than 3 millennia to the Bronze Age a time when most of Western civilization was still living in simple huts.
A vast, sprawling, wealthy, very accomplished kingdom.
One of the estimates for the population is 18,000 people. So we hadn't kind of realized that there would have been that high a population in a single place in prehistory.
It certainly was the earliest known city in Europe.
Arthur Evans has unearthed an ancient city way ahead of its time. But what he's desperate to find is some form of written record of the people who created Europe's very first metropolis.
He came there looking for writing, and he was a man of supreme self-confidence, and in this case, justifiably so, because he found it.
Within weeks of discovering Knossos, Evans and his team begin to unearth hundreds of fragments of clay tablets, each one inscribed with a mysterious form of writing. Evans believes these curious symbols and markings are a clue to the lives of this unknown civilization.
What thrilled Evans was he knew he had come upon Europe's oldest written records, an entire European civilization that had languished for 30 centuries in the dusk of prehistory.
Unlocking the secrets of this lost city means deciphering the 3,000-year-old code. But that's a monumental challenge, because no one has seen anything like this ancient script before.
An unknown writing system used to write an unknown language. That is the linguistic equivalent of a locked room mystery.
Arthur Evans has no idea what language the ancient script recorded. But the images, or pictograms, used within the text give a clue to the tablet's contents.
There were tablets about grain, tablets about livestock. And so what Evans knew immediately was he had come upon the administrative records of a lavish, thriving European civilization that existed 1,000 years before the Greek classical period.
This is a real glimpse, potentially, into real everyday life thousands of years ago.
Evans was sure that deciphering the mysterious text could help him rewrite history. But his plan to unlock the ancients' lost secrets is about to come unstuck. As Evans unearths more and more clay tablets from the Knossos site, it becomes clear there are subtle differences in some of the fragments. The only explanation is that he has discovered more than just one type of writing.
Evans knew that he was looking at two related yet different scripts. So did these two different scripts record two different languages or the same language?
Arthur Evans names the two scripts Linear A and Linear B. Although there are similarities in the individual characters, Linear A inscriptions are smaller and shorter.
If you compare Linear A and Linear B, Linear A documents tend to be almost quite messy.
Linear B is the opposite. More complex, more detailed, and more organized.
The Linear B tablets are almost always ruled where the text sits on horizontal rules that were inscribed on the wet clay before the characters were written on top of them.
Two different writing systems, They're clearly connected, but how? Could they be the languages of two different civilizations, one more sophisticated than the other? Or is the explanation something else entirely? By 1905, Arthur Evans is back in Britain at his hilltop mansion overlooking the famous Dreaming Spires of Oxford. Here, Evans spends the next 3 years trying to unlock the mysterious script. But his efforts get him nowhere.
No one knew what language these symbols recorded, much less what the tablet said.
Ancient scripts are not there to confuse us. It's just that the passage of time has meant that we have no idea what these symbols and signs mean.
Evans wasn't the first person to face such a perplexing task. 200 years earlier, another lost script was causing similar problems in Egypt. The meaning of hieroglyphs, the strange and wonderful writing system devised and used for centuries by the ancient Egyptians, had been lost for almost 2 millennia.
Hieroglyphs are a special language for communication with the gods. So we see them adorning all the beautiful temple complexes across Egypt. It's a special sacred language.
But on July 15th, 1799, French soldiers under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte made a surprise discovery in a small town on the Nile Delta called Rosetta.
Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt in the late 18th century, and in 1799 they were excavating an area where they were effectively entrenched themselves.
They come up to an old wall, and in the old wall they spot this damaged, crushed inscription, and the chief officer, Pierre-Francois Bouchard, immediately recognizes this is something interesting.
Just like Arthur Evans, the soldiers had discovered an ancient tablet, this time carrying an inscribed message in Egyptian hieroglyphs. But crucially, it carried the same message carved in other languages as well.
The most important feature is that the Rosetta Stone has 3 different languages, with one language being known at the time, and that enabled the other languages to be unlocked.
When Napoleon's army was defeated by the British 3 years later, it was forced to hand over all looted antiquities. That included the tablet that would become known as the Rosetta Stone.
The French army did know that it was important, and they did make drawings so that they could study the inscription, I think especially when they realized they were going to have to hand it over to the British army.
When the Rosetta Stone arrived in England, experts immediately recognized it held the key to solving one of archaeology's greatest mysteries: how to read Egyptian hieroglyphs. But who cracked it first?
What we end up having is this kind of exciting race between British and French scholars.
In England, it was the scholar Thomas Young who would make the first major step forward.
He's often referred to as the last man who knew everything. He made breakthroughs in medicine, he made breakthroughs in physics. He did all sorts of amazing things, and he managed to make some breakthroughs in understanding hieroglyphs.
Despite having the same message in 3 different scripts, cracking the hieroglyph code proved elusive, until Young made an educated guess that paid off.
Among the hieroglyphs were a cartouche. A cartouche is a set of hieroglyphs that are ringed, and that means they mean something important. What could be important? Well, maybe the name of a pharaoh.
Studying the Greek translation on the Rosetta Stone revealed the name of a pharaoh, Ptolemy.
Thomas Young said, well, what about if the cartouche represents the name of Ptolemy? And maybe each of the hieroglyphs within the cartouche represent elements of the name of Ptolemy.
That's how he breaks it down. And we start getting names, we start getting sounds, and then the language comes to life. It's not just a picture, it's a writing system that has sounds we can attach to it.
The Rosetta Stone gave experts the key that would unlock the meaning of the mysterious ancient Egyptian script. Two centuries later, archaeologist Arthur Evans is also trying to decode a lost language. But he doesn't have a Rosetta Stone to guide him. By 1907, Evans has become obsessed with being the person who will finally unlock Linear B. But his single-minded determination leads him to make a mistake that will ensure the lost language is never translated in his lifetime.
Arthur Evans published very few photographs and drawings of them, which meant that almost no data about these weird symbols were accessible to other scholars. This was his find, and he would be damned if anyone cracked the code of the script before he did.
He's on the tracks and he wants to be the guy who gets there first. His reluctance to release the materials he'd found certainly didn't help the process of decipherment.
Arthur Evans becomes convinced the Nieder Linear B tablets record the language of the most sophisticated people ever to live at Knossos. A population who lived in the shadows of an elaborate palace, which according to myth was home to the ruler King Minos.
King Minos was the son of Zeus and Europa in Greek mythology. He was this sort of legendary king who was very powerful, and so he was able to accrue a great and tremendous amount of wealth.
Crete as a superpower is associated historically with King Minos. So when Sir Arthur Evans stumbles upon this giant palace on Crete, one can see how this myth comes alive.
According to Greek legend, King Minos's palace was home to a labyrinth which held the mythical half-man, half-bull, Minotaur.
All these things must have been evoking all those stories and kind of bringing history and myth to life in a way.
We had always thought that this was only a legend, but here we are proving that history and archaeology shows that some legends are true.
Evans names the lost civilization the Minoans, after King Minos. And he's determined to prove that Linear B records the language they spoke.
It was imperative to him, for reasons of scholarship, but also for reasons of ego, to decipher these tablets, and in so doing, shed a vast, glorious light on this Minoan civilization that he had unearthed.
But his stubborn obsession that the lost language belonged to the Minoans will turn out to be a tragic error of judgment.
One danger of doing that is when we approach writing with expectations of what it's going to be, that does shape the way that we view the writing and what we find.
Arthur Evans was a remarkable individual who certainly was pioneering, but in other ways, he held back our understanding of this language.
After 3 years of obsessive cataloging the tablets, the only thing Evans can say for sure is that they are lists. But he has no idea at all what any of those lists actually say. Then, in 1908, A new discovery in Crete appears to throw Evans the lifeline he desperately needs. On the other side of the island, archaeologists have unearthed another ancient town dating to a similar time as Knossos.
There's an important site called Phaistos. It also had a fairly large palace. And as they were excavating this palace, they come upon a certain room, effectively a basement. And in there, they find a single circular tablet.
The circular tablet is exquisite and is covered in a form of script made entirely of images or pictograms. Each one has been stamped into the clay, and some of the images appear to be similar to those found on the tablets from Knossos.
Some of these seem a bit familiar and like they might relate to some of the pictures we've seen in Linear A and Linear B, but we've just never seen anything like this stamped in this particular way.
The mysterious disc has been made using techniques far in advance of the clay tablets Evans unearthed. But other artifacts it was discovered with prove it was created long before the Linear B tablets. Could the disc's images be a precursor to the writing system found on the clay tablets from Knossos?
There are 242 different stamped pictograms on it that represent 46 different types of symbols. The pictograms have a man with what looks like a bit of a mohawk hairstyle to other pictures of objects.
This is very unique and different. The way it's written, first of all, is that it looks like a spiral. You have these symbols that we think are written from the inside to the outside. It seems to be related to some kind of language, but how you would read this and what language it would be in are mysteries.
Back in England, despite studying the Phaistos disc for weeks, Arthur Evans draws a blank. Perhaps the disc is yet another indication of the Minoans' advanced civilization.
This could be a missing link, but there's not enough evidence to say one way or another.
It isn't the Rosetta Stone Evans is hoping for in his quest to crack Linear A or B. Despite finding fame as the discoverer of one of the most incredible ancient cities on Earth, it is Evans' single-minded obsession with decoding Linear B that will come to dominate his life for the next 30 years.
Arthur Evans did really important groundwork, preparing the materials and presenting them in a format which others could make use of once they were at least made available. Ultimately, collaboration is usually the way these things end up being solved.
But Evans is not a natural collaborator, and he will never uncover the secrets of the tablets.
Arthur Evans dies as a kind of defeated person in terms of trying to decipher language. He doesn't ever resolve what the language is.
And he had no one to blame but himself.
He had made almost no headway, partly because he was married to the notion that the Linear B script recorded the language of the Minoans. It stopped him from seeing what Linear B really was.
Arthur Evans dies age 90 in 1941. The chaos of World War II means his death goes largely unrecognized in his home country. But 3,000 miles away, across the Atlantic in New York, a professor of classics at Brooklyn College is mourning his loss. Like Evans before her, 35-year-old Alice Kober has become fixated on Linear B. When Evans dies without decoding the ancient language, she grabs the opportunity to step into his shoes.
Alice Cover taught classics by day, by night working obsessively at her kitchen table in her modest Brooklyn home. She pored over every element of the script that was available to her. She was so single-minded, she appeared almost completely devoid of a personal life.
Arthur Evans had been obsessed with finding connections between Linear B and what he'd discovered about Minoan culture. But Alice Cober does something completely different. Because unlike Evans, she doesn't care whose language it is. She simply wants to crack its code.
Alice Cober approaches Linear B in a very analytical fashion. So she uses basically frequency analysis to try to understand the signs of Linear B and what their values may be.
Frequency analysis is a method first identified by the godfather of codebreaking, the 9th century Arab scholar, Al-Kindi.
Al-Kindi is one of the great philosophers. Living in the 9th century in Baghdad, he wrote 200, 300 books on all sorts of subjects, from astronomy to astrology, from theology to cryptography. Al-Kindi wrote the very first manuscript we have on how to crack a code.
Al-Kindi's works describe in detail how to decrypt a code when the meanings of the symbols are completely unknown.
What Al-Kindi focused on was the frequency of letters. Every letter has a certain frequency. E is very, very common in English. Q is really rather rare. So if we replace E with a square and Q with a triangle, we have loads and loads of squares in the encrypted message and very, very few triangles. And that helps us work out that the square is really an E and a triangle is really a Q.
Al-Kindi's discovery meant he could crack almost any code where letters had been replaced with symbols.
Now, this idea was revolutionary, and it must have given Al-Kindi and the people he worked for tremendous power to be able to interpret and understand the secret messages of their rivals.
Although Linear B isn't a cipher purposely designed to hide secrets, it is the code of a lost language. So Alice Cober figures the principles of frequency analysis might still apply.
Alice Cober is able to identify through repetition the frequency of certain symbols together.
For years, she meticulously records the frequency of every symbol and every character inscribed on the tablets. But it wasn't always an easy task.
During World War II and after, paper was a very scarce commodity, so she hand-cut and annotated thousands and thousands of index cards from any spare paper she could find, which she stored inside the one paper product of which she sadly seemed to have no short supply, and that was empty cigarette cartons.
She has no computer, she has no database. She had 180,000 index cards that she had made, so she did all of this by hand.
After years of achingly slow analysis of the letters and their patterns, Alice makes a game-changing discovery.
Sometimes you have a set of the same signs appearing in multiple different places in tablets, but with different sets of signs on the end. These must be the same word, but with different endings.
The language of the Linear B tablets, whatever it was an inflected language. That is to say, its grammar was built upon word endings, much as the grammar of Latin or classical Greek.
Inflections are added to a stem word to change its meaning. Adding ER to read changes it from the verb read to the noun reader. Adding an S to dog turns it into the plural dogs. Referencing her 180,000 index cards, Alice begins to identify linear B inflections, the equivalent of ER or S in English, even though she doesn't know the meaning of the stem words they're attached to. She starts to build a grid to show which signs work together to form words in this mysterious language.
Now, this is the key. The grid is the key to the decipherment.
She may not know what the words mean, but Alice is beginning to understand the laws that define how linear B works. It's grammar. After almost a decade, the classic scholar from Brooklyn is on target to finally realize Arthur Evans' dream of decoding the lost language. But in 1950, tragedy strikes. After years of heavy chain smoking, Alice dies, aged just 43.
To this day, we don't know exactly what killed her. It was whispered among the women in the family that Alice Kober had some very rare type of stomach cancer.
Tragically, Alice doesn't get to see the fruits of her labor realized. She doesn't get to read what these tablets actually say.
Alice Kober got so far, but died young, sadly, and the grid was certainly far from complete.
By 1950, despite years of obsessive academic research, the promise of unlocking the secrets of the ancient advanced civilization of the Minoans slips away again. The lost language of Linear B remains unsolved. But in London, England, someone unexpected is about to take up the challenge. Someone with no training at all in either archaeology or classics. An architect who's been obsessed with Linear B since childhood.
Michael Ventris goes to a lecture given by Arthur Evans in the late 1930s and determines at a young age, he's still a teenager at this point, that he's going to decipher this language.
Like Evans and Kober before him, Ventris's fascination with Linear B borders on obsession. Not even World War II had come between him and the ancient script.
Michael Ventris was drafted into the war. He becomes a flight navigator. So he's very much preoccupied in fighting the war. But even then, he spends time looking at Linear B, trying to understand the symbology.
Michael Ventris is the one who takes up the quest for a full decipherment in the wake of Alice Kober's work.
Ventris thinks Alice Kober's grid could be the key he needs to unlock the mysterious script. After Alice dies, Ventris, now settled in Hampstead Heath, North London, puts all his energy into completing the work she started. But unlike Alice, he's not just interested in discovering how Linear B was written. Ventris wants to understand how the lost language was spoken. So he creates his own grid, taking Alice's grouped symbols and allocating potential sounds to them, based on nothing more than educated guesswork.
Until you know the sound values, you've no idea what language you're dealing with. So the next critical step was to start trying to build up a sense of the sounds of words in the tablets.
Ventris knows that hearing Linear B spoken out loud might just reveal whose language it was.
It could be a language that had died on Crete and was related to nothing subsequently. Or it could be a language that's evolved over time and was still used in some part of the ancient world.
And the young architect from London is about to be thrown an unexpected lifeline. Arthur Evans spent the last 40 years of his life pursuing the belief that Linear B was Minoan in origin and unique to Crete. But in 1951, details are published of hundreds more ancient tablets, also inscribed with Linear B text. But these tablets weren't found anywhere near Crete. They were excavated 100 miles away in Pylos on the Greek mainland.
These clay tablets at Pylos prove that the ones that are at Knossos are not an exception, and that the same language that was being written in Pylos is the same language that was being written in Knossos.
The latest set of tablets are discovered buried among the remains of the ancient palace of Nestor. But it's not a Minoan palace. It was built by the civilization that replaced them.
Lo and behold, suddenly, here is a writing system that looks very much the same as Linear B, and it's cropped up outside of Crete and enduring for a couple of centuries longer than had been thought.
Suddenly, we have to reevaluate everything, because if this is the Minoan language, then why is it on mainland Greece, and why is it being used long after the Minoans were using it?
These two places, Crete and Pylos, are speaking, or at least writing, in the same language. Something doesn't make sense.
Two ancient civilizations, separated by 100 miles of the Mediterranean Sea and hundreds of years, both using the exact same writing system.
The Pylos discovery was extremely important for Michael Ventris's decipherment because it gave him much more data.
Ventris uses the new data to further add to his grid. And what he discovers will be the final key to unlocking the lost language. He identifies 3 sets of symbols that appear repeatedly on clay fragments from Knossos, but don't appear anywhere on any of the tablets from Pylos. Ventris makes an educated guess that these 3 words could be place names on ancient Crete.
While languages change, one thing that does stay consistent is a place name. Place names that are present today often have names that would have been somewhat similar in the past, even the distant past.
Ventris chooses one of the 3 sets of symbols unique to the Cretan tablets and adds them to his grid of potential sounds. And the word it forms is strangely familiar. This could be the ancient spelling of Amnisos, a harbor town close to Knossos. Ventris tentatively locks the sounds into his grid and adds the 2nd set of symbols. The result is astonishing.
Knossos, the very place where the tablets had been found at the start.
Half a century after the tablets were discovered, Michael Ventris has made the very first translation of a fragment of Linear B text. He then adds the 3rd set of symbols to the grid, only to reveal Tulissos, another ancient Cretan town.
Each new place name he unraveled gave him more data to put in other cells of the grid. So it was a chain reaction.
So you know now that all those vowels and all those consonants can be projected onto other symbols in the same row or in the same column.
And once you get 1 or 2 of those values right, you get a domino effect.
For the first time in over 3,000 years, the lost language of Linear B is coming to life. The more connections Ventris makes, the more obvious it becomes that Evans' obsession to prove Linear B is Minoan has been a 50-year wild goose chase. It's only when spoken aloud that the truth is revealed, because Ventris recognizes the words he's now hearing. Linear B isn't a record of some long-lost Minoan language. The words inscribed on the tablets are a form of ancient Greek. Ventris's discovery rocks the academic world.
This isn't possible. Nobody has ever suggested Linear B could be Greek. This must be wrong.
This mysterious-looking symbolic language all of a sudden became a real language that had a real connection to the present as well as the past.
His discovery goes against everything the experts thought they knew about early Greek civilization.
It was a revelation for scholars. So it took a while for people to accept Michael Ventris's discovery that this is ancient Greek. They didn't actually want to believe it.
One cynic is John Chadwick, a former World War II codebreaker and lecturer in ancient Greek at Cambridge University, England.
John was very skeptical, and he really did need to be convinced that there was some solid foundation before he would go along with it.
Chadwick reluctantly looks into Ventris's theory, and he's astonished to discover Ventris has done exactly what he claims. He has unlocked the ancient script of Linear B.
Michael Ventris wasn't expecting to find Greek because nobody had ever expected to find Greek. When he did find Greek, he found someone who was qualified to tell him he wasn't out of his mind, that it really did look like Greek.
Now totally convinced by Ventris's claims, in 1952, Chadwick joins forces with him to decode the rest of the language.
It's this synergy that is so key in cracking a code. And the two of them, over the next 4 years, managed to come up with a fairly good decoding of Linear B.
Deciphering the symbols that had perplexed Arthur Evans and Alice Kober for decades reveals words first used thousands of years ago, many of which remain in use today.
One of these words that we come across is the word demos, for the people. And that is the kind of catchphrase of democracy in the ancient world. And this very idea of democracy that still defines a lot of Western culture, we can now trace the root of that word back to a word in Linear B.
Their work is groundbreaking. But just weeks before they are due to publish their historic findings, the curse of Linear B strikes again.
Unfortunately, it seems that tragedy strikes a lot of these scholars. Michael Ventris was in an unfortunate car accident, and he passed away right prior to the publication of his monumental work.
He drove out in his car alone, late at night, pulled into a rest area, a lay-by at high speed, and slammed into the back of a parked truck. He was killed instantly.
Michael Ventris was just 34 when he died. He devoted years building on the work of first Arthur Evans and then Alice Kober. But his collaboration with John Chadwick proved undeniably that Linear B was the first writing system of the ancient Greeks.
Prior to the discovery of Linear B, effectively we had a dark age. We didn't know much about European Greek history, prior to the pre-classical period. And so now we have a light.
It's been called by some the Everest of Greek archaeology because it's completely transformed the way that we view Greek culture and the way that we connect different parts of history.
Before Linear B was cracked, experts had assumed the first Greeks only communicated by word of mouth. Deciphering the ancient code revealed they were far more sophisticated than modern experts had assumed. They had their own writing system centuries earlier than anyone had ever imagined.
It's given us a real insight into everyday life in the Bronze Age. It's also given us a very different perspective on the history of the Greek language.
But while the language recorded by Linear B has finally come to life, thanks to almost 50 years of obsessive research, the same is not true of Linear A, the earlier version of the script discovered by Arthur Evans at Knossos.
It is a language that seems to influence Linear B. The symbols are somewhat comparable or similar. But what's also clear is that we have now two different languages.
If you applied Linear B type sound values to Linear A signs, you could say sort of what Linear A sounded like, but it didn't sound or look like Greek.
To this day, the language of Linear A remains uncracked. Ironically, archaeologists and linguists now believe that Arthur Evans was in part correct. Just as he'd theorized, the Minoans did indeed have their own unique writing system, but it was Linear A. Sadly, Evans' attraction to the neatness and order of Linear B distracted him from the true Minoan language.
We can see that Linear A and Linear B are very closely related to each other. It must be that Greek speakers borrow Linear A, make some small adaptations to it, but largely they pick it up and they use it for their own language.
Linear A remained in use on Crete until the first Greeks arrived around 1450 BC. Over time, they became the dominant civilization. But they took on much of the Minoans' advanced culture, and ultimately their pioneering writing system, to record a version of their language.
Rather than starting from square one of the cool things about taking over a pre-existing civilization is that you can build on top of everything that they've already built.
It wasn't a civilization that just bursts onto the scene. The ancient Greeks had a sort of process where they developed their language slowly over time, and Linear B was that critical phase where written Greek was developed for the first time.
Arthur Evans, Alice Kober, and Michael Ventris all devoted their lives to cracking Linear B. And their shared obsession with decoding a lost language ultimately did so much more.
Now, for the first time, we know the Greek language derived from this civilization that spoke and wrote ancient Greek.
The decoding of Linear B has revealed the earliest origins of the Greek civilization, and in turn, the very beginnings of today's modern society.
It reshapes our vision of the Greek world and where Greek culture came from.
We can't overestimate really the importance of these tablets. They really effectively changed history.